Right now, we go to James Corbett, who's an independent journalist who's been living and working in Japan since 2004. You may have seen his website, CorbettReport.com. He's been writing and producing the Corbett Report, an independent listener-supported alternative media and information source since 2007. His forthcoming book, Reportage, Essays on the New World Order, will be available for purchase in early 2011. And we're going to bring him up right now to get more into the Middle East and what's going on with the New World Order in general as he chronicles nearly all the same subjects we do and in great detail. James, are you there?
I am here, and thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, helping to drive the tip of the spear even further into the heart of the New World Order. And it's so important right now, as you know, as the globalists are upsetting the geopolitical grand chessboard so that they can put the pieces back on the board in their own favor.
Well, thanks, James. It's an honor for me to be here, too. I'm filling in for rather big shoes, but I'm doing the best I can. What do you think is most important right now in the Middle East as we see North Africa, the Peninsula region, and really that whole area just west of Iraq all unfolding into crisis? And the looming question, will worldwide rise in unrest, culminate?
Well, it's a good question, and it's one that's absolutely vital for us to deal with right now, because although I've seen some great coverage of this in the alternative media that seems to be casting a skeptical eye to what's going on, unfortunately, I don't see that filtering down to a lot of the people that I see on a daily basis here. And it's unfortunate to me that there are so many people who are buying into this rather unquizzically, just that they're toppling dictators in the Middle East, so everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows and lollipops. But of course, we know that this is part of a much, much greater plan and an agenda that's unfolding right now. And it seems to me that, to take a Hansel and Gretel analogy, the globalist-controlled corporate and foundation-funded media loves to create these houses of candy for us out in the woods because we're lost and starving, and we've come across this house made of candy. Oh, it looks so good. Let's go and eat it, and we'll stay in it. And this nice little old lady comes and invites us in, and of course she just wants to shove us into the oven and eat us. And that's, to me, is the analogy of what's going on here. Of course, they're going to create these wonderful looking events that are going to be all about peace and democracy, even as they're at the exact same time about bombing people, in other countries, exact continuation of the neocon agenda. But most people on the left side of the false left-right paradigm won't really catch on to that. And it's unfortunate to me, because it seems there is a geopolitical grand chessboard, and it is being used to play this great game. And unfortunately, the public is trapped playing checkers while the globalists are playing chess. And if that's the case, I mean, we're going to lose every single time. But it seems to me there is an elephant in the room here, and it's a billion-person elephant in the room, and it's called China. And I think that, to me, is what a lot of this is aimed at. And we can see it in country after country where this destabilization is happening, from Yemen to Egypt to Libya. And I've got some articles here that showcase what's going on pretty well. All news that's happening in very recent times that has to do with these countries and these dictators that are being toppled now. Of course, all of these dictators are being propped up by the U.S. and with U.S. aid, and have been in power because they have been serviceable puppets to the U.S. But the question is, have they been the greatest puppets, and can better puppets be installed? So if you take a look at the Jamestown Foundation, for example, they have an article, Burgeoning China-Yemen Ties Showcase Beijing's Middle East Strategy. And it talks about how Hu Jintao has just invited President Ali Abdullah Saleh over to China for an historic 6-day summit to talk about expanding ties between China and Yemen. And it says here, China's stake in Yemen, however, goes far beyond the energy and trade spheres. Beijing is determined to strengthen its role as an emerging political and diplomatic player in the Middle East. Beijing's diplomatic and economic overtures to Yemen provide a glimpse into China's grand strategy in the region. And surprise, surprise, now Ali Abdullah Saleh is in trouble because people are trying to overthrow him. You go to Egypt, you have Mubarak, who of course was propped up with U.S. aid, the second largest recipient of U.S. aid, so was a U.S. serviceable puppet for not the Americans, of course, but the New World Order that controls the American government. And you can even go to the State Information Service, cis.gov.eg, and you can get a report, Mubarak, China-Africa Partnership to Achieve Peace Development. And it talks about a conference that was happening in 2009. Mubarak hosted quoted Hu Jintao and the Chinese delegation as they're talking about expanded Chinese-African cooperation. And then when you go to Libya, of course you're talking about oil, and it's not so much that the New World Order needs to control that oil for themselves, it's that they need to stop it from falling into the hands of the Chinese, because obviously China is the billion-person elephant in the room, and it's consuming oil at a great rate. So controlling China's oil reserves is an extremely important part of this game. So you can go to thestreet.com. They have an article from the 24th of February of this year, China Oil Company attacked in Libya. So you have these spontaneous protests of people who want to overthrow the dictator who are also attacking Chinese oil companies. So it seems to me in country after country, there seems to be a certain direction that these are heading in. And I'm not saying this is the only thing that this is about, but I think that there is some aspect of the geopolitical great game being played here.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of aspects, because you have China also trying to squelch their own protests right now. People trying to bring in, I guess, so-called democracy. But that's really the problem. It's brand democracy that we're trying to so-called export from our foreign policy. The Bush had rhetoric about it. The Bush administration had rhetoric about it. Obama's continuing that. And we see that through these NGOs that we know are on the playing field in the Mideast. And then we have all the revelations that Lindsey Williams brought to the program last year about how they want to stop the oil trade, let these prices go up. We've seen some skyrocketing already with the oil prices. But as you pointed out, it's really this geostrategic plan to hold out for the end game. We've got all this stuff in Alaska. We've got more energy there to last us probably for a millennia. But as you say, it's about challenging China's authority to that energy, even as we have all our own domestic problems with China and the debt.
Right, exactly. And to a certain extent, the whole Chinese thing is a smokescreen. I mean, we run the risk sometimes of being so close up to the painting that we're looking at each brushstroke as it happens, so that we understand exactly how the painting is being painted. But we have to take a couple steps back to see the bigger picture and see what's actually being painted. And in this case as well, of course, the Chinese American, I hate to even say American, because of course it's the New World Order, the globalist control over the American government, but the tensions that are going on and the interplay is to a certain extent a smokescreen, because we know that the Chinese have been built up by the New World Order, the very same New World Order who have created the economic collapse, that have created the destabilizations throughout this region and throughout Europe as well. So it's all a smokescreen at a certain level, and we know that Rockefeller gave eulogies to Chairman Mao in the New York Times, saying it was a great experiment that, oh, by the way, just happened to kill 60 million of his own people conservatively. Or you have the Clintons back in the 90s, of course. Bill Clinton himself personally approving the transfer of advanced nuclear technologies to China. You have all sorts of ways in which the New World Order has been building up China, and now you have Soros going around saying China will be the engine of the New World Order, and he even uses that term. I mean, if people don't believe me, just Google it, just YouTube it. It is out there. Soros, New World Order. He's talking about China being the engine of the new system that they're working to bring about. And of course, it's Soros and Brzezinski and people like that who are behind these types of color revolutions. So it's all one big circle that unfortunately is drawing us further and further into the globalist grasp.
Sure, and you have back in the 70s with Kissinger in the Nixon era, all their diplomacy in China was just about triangulating China to kind of pivot off of Russia as they play for control in that region, in the subcontinent region of Asia and the Middle East area. Can you comment more on the actual grand chessboard and the whole arc of instability in that region? We know the things Brzezinski and Kissinger and others have talked about. Where does China fit in terms of playing that actual chess game?
Well, an excellent question, and I think there's the near term and the long term. I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of a quiet, at this stage it's quiet and behind the scenes, but the beginnings of a type of Cold War situation where I think it's going to be about trying to gobble up and grasp control of the various oil reserves and mineral reserves, especially in Africa. I think the New World Order controlled American government has been looking for a toehold in Africa for a while now to try to keep the Chinese out, because there's a lot of resources, especially in the North African region where all this destabilization is happening right now, that China has been looking at and attempting to acquire over the past couple of decades to feed their growing industrial engine. So I think that's what this stage of the game is about right now. It's a very under the radar type of Cold War scenario that's shaping up. But I think the longer term, what we're seeing is in the similar way to the Cold War itself, which to a certain extent was smoke screens, because as we know, the globalists were controlling and funding both sides of that phony crisis as well, in order to perpetuate a system where there's a constant threat of outside intervention and force. Therefore, there has to be the perpetual military-industrial complex, and then B, at a greater extent, when the Cold War really creates the Hegelian dialectic, where you have two forces playing off against each other, and the result is a synthesis between the two. So you see the Sovietization of America and the capitalization of the Soviet Union bloc, and that's the same thing they want to set up with China, I think.
All right, we have the music coming in, but we're going to get more into the geostrategic game that's going on in the Middle East and the other areas when we get back. Infowars.com. We are back on this Monday, February 28th, 2011 broadcast. My name is Aaron Dykes. I'm filling in for Alex, who will be back tomorrow, and he'll be on the show later in this hour. Right now, we're on with James Corbett of the CorbettReport.com. And before the break, James raised a very interesting point, paralleling this back to the Cold War. And I really think in many ways the Cold War was not only against the Soviet Union, but it was a classic dialectical excuse to invade all kinds of parts of the third world countries. Most of the countries in Latin America went through revolution, coups, or destabilizations in that Cold War period. Many, if not most, of the countries in Africa went through the same phase. Many of the countries in Asia, East Asia, all along the arc of crisis in particular, all suffered regime change and real pressure from both the West and the Soviet sphere during the Cold War. And this isn't the time to make the argument that the Soviets were propped up by the West and that they were kind of a paper tiger. But more than anything, it was an excuse to say, well, these are dictators in this part of the Latin American world. These are dictators in Africa, but they're pro-West, so that makes them democratic, and at least they're not communist. Or we have to invade this country, or the domino effect is going to take over, and we're going to see communism spread throughout the region. That kind of dialectic really gives an easy excuse for the U.S. and NATO, to go into these regions. And today it's just as easy with the economic disaster, with the humanitarian crisis agenda. And so, James Corbett, what do you think about that? Can we flesh out some more of the Cold War parallels?
Well, exactly right. And it's important for people to understand that it's not just a dialectic, it's a completely false dialectic. It gives people a false choice. So it might lead some people to think that if I'm against the wave of protests and destabilization happening in the region, that means that I'm in favor of the dictators or something along those lines. Of course, that's not the case, but it makes everyone choose sides in a phony game that's rigged from the beginning, so that no matter which side you choose, that you're going to lose. And that's unfortunately the way they often set these types of things up, because they understand, unfortunately, that the majority of the public is playing checkers while they're playing chess, and when that's the case, we're just going to lose every single time. So we have to be a bit smarter about this and understand that when the people in the $3,000 suits being paid $50 million a year with their 10,000 watt smiles get on camera and tell you how wonderful everything in this region is, we know that they are being paid to say that because it serves the interests of the people who are paying them. And it's a pretty simple point, but it's one that a lot of people don't seem to take into account. So this destabilization does help, unfortunately, the globalist interests that are really in the long term only interested in melding the entire thing into one united world government, which of course we know is the big end game of all of this. So again, it's not in our interest to concentrate too much on the individual things that are happening without taking into account the bigger picture.